Welcome to the Brothers in Crime podcast.
We are brothers.
We talk about true crime.
We don't take ourselves too seriously.
And you shouldn't either.
So today I want to talk about a bombing case. I'm not sure why, but those kind of fascinate me.
Yeah, last time we were together, you said something to the effect of, I really like the bombings and the family annihilators. And I don't know, I made me a little scared, but...
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't want to say, that I like them, but those two types of cases, for whatever reason, just fascinate me the most. I don't know that I've ever seen one combined.
I was thinking about that. I don't know that I have either, but I guess your family annihilator type probably isn't also the bombing type, but maybe that's something we need to look into.
I guess not, or maybe, I don't know, maybe there's some logistics involved in trying to get a whole family together in the proximity that a pipe bomb or homemade bomb would be fatal. I don't know. I don't know nothing about them, so I couldn't tell you. But we're going to have to go back in history a little bit to make this all make sense, because it's kind of complex, which of course fascinates me even more than just being a bombing case on its own.
All right.
So we got to go back to New York in the 1800s to a guy named Joseph Smith. He is the founder of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, otherwise known as the Mormons. And in the late 1820s, he said that he was kind of wandered around in the woods and was visited by an angel named Moroni, who told him that there was this set of golden plates that were buried near his house, and that he was supposed to find these plates and transcribe or translate what was written on them into the Book of Mormon.
Now, you usually give me crap for geography lessons, but, are you on your mission right now, or what is this? I feel like you're trying to, convert me to be a Mormon or something.
Oh, no. No, I'm just telling you, I'm trying to be unbiased here, because personally, I am not a Mormon, but I respect other people's, right to practice whatever faith they believe.
But so this whole Joseph Smith in the wilderness story is actually relevant for your case today. We need to hear it.
Absolutely.
All right, okay.
Absolutely.
My bad. I thought you were just having fun.
It will 100% make sense. Just stick with me.
Okay.
So he organizes the church in 1830. The Mormon church wasn't real popular back then, even though we weren't too far removed from separating from England so that we could have religious freedom, among other things. Mormonism was not held in high regard. So they end up going to Ohio in the 1830s. They build a temple, they grow a membership.
Now explain some things.
And then they they end up in Missouri. But that ends up in what was known as the 1838 Mormon War, which can't be a good thing.
Wow.
And the governor, I find this just fascinating as well, the governor issued Missouri Executive Order 44, expelling Mormons from the state. Can you imagine?
That's kind of funny. Well, Mormon War, that's, wow. Okay.
Right, y'all get your shit and get out.
Take all your wives and leave.
It reminds me when I was a bartender at closing the bar,
Right.
Throwing people out. But this is the governor who writes it down. Y'all got to go. Anyway, so they head out of Missouri, they go up to Illinois, and they found a city there called Nauvoo. I'm not sure if that's how it's pronounced, Nauvoo.
Oh.
Yeah, I might be pronouncing that one all wrong, so add that one to my score sheet. They ended up with about 12,000 members of the church there by the time Smith died, and Smith died in 1844.
So not that long after, 1830, 1844.
Right. He wasn't there long. He was the mayor. Of course, I guess you can be the mayor when you create the city, and you're the religious leader, and the whole city's population are your followers. I guess you're the obvious choice for mayor.
Yeah.
But anyway, even though he may have been well beloved there in that city he founded, he was not well beloved really by anyone other than the Mormons, it seems like. So I believe the reason he was in Carthage, Illinois, which is where he was killed, I believe he was headed to a trial. And I think he was actually in jail at that point, but both he and his brother were killed by a mob there.
Oh.
So at that point, the Mormons thought maybe it's time to move on.
Maybe Nauvoo or whatever is not the place for us either.
They didn't just head out, they kind of split off because there was some debate over who's in charge next now that the main man has been killed.
Makes sense. That usually happens after the clear leader dies or disappears.
Yeah, and there's a little more tied to this because in the Mormon faith, the leader, which is called the president, I guess, is believed to be like the seer, the revelator. You have like this direct connect to God. So I guess it's not just like, well, we got to pick the guy that'll do the best. We got to figure out, I guess, which guy has got the connect. Because I don't really understand it, so I'm not going to keep talking about it.
Okay, fair enough.
But anyway,
Let's get to the murder part.
There was some split off going on there.
Okay.
So it wasn't just all of them, but a large chunk of the Mormons there decided to follow Brigham Young. I'm sure you've heard that name before.
They got a football team.
He led them west, eventually landing in Salt Lake City. Well, it wasn't Salt Lake City then, it was just the Salt Lake Valley in 1847. And the path from where they were to Salt Lake became known as the Mormon Trail. And apparently that was a pretty hard trip.
They should have turned it into a video game.
Right?
Like Oregon Trail, but Mormon Trail.
Yeah, they could.
And then, there could be I'm not going to go there. Okay, I'll keep talking.
The pioneers there, they founded Salt Lake City, other settlements. They created a large state called Deseret, which extended from Canada to Mexico. One of the issues, though, is that Brigham Young, he governed the whole thing. He was a theocratic leader, and he practiced the plural marriage, polygamy.
I've never understood that. Never.
So there was
no shame on anybody. I just personally don't get it.
I can't imagine what man wants to endure that kind of torture.
Amen.
Isn't one enough? Anyway, so there were some tensions with the U.S. government. Especially you've got this guy that's the leader of this religious group that is not very well liked outside of its own group. Mm-hmm. And that guy is also not the governor, but the de facto governor. Mm-hmm. It didn't go so well. So with some pressure from Uncle Sam, the Mormons agreed to have a political governor of the state rather than Young being leader of both the church and the state.
Which was kind of like part of why we left England in the first place.
Right. It's sensible. But I guess you're Brigham Young and you're the leader of the Mormons, you're the leader of the church, and these are your people, and all the people that are here are members of your church. Sort of like, who do you get to come be the governor? It would almost has to be someone of that faith, so it gets pretty wound in together. And that continues on. I mean, the church still has a huge influence in Utah. It controls 90% of the Senate, and at least in the 80s, the church owned at the time this was all, the murders that we're going to talk about happened, the church owned the major newspaper and the TV station in Salt Lake City.
That's interesting. Now, real quick, I was going to ask you a question and it fell right out of my head. But I don't think there's an N. Isn't it just Brigham Young?
It could be.
I know you like to give me crap about my pronunciation, so it's nice to finally flip the tables.
Brigham Young?
Yeah, I think so. I don't think it's Brigham.
Yeah, no, that sounds right. Brigham Young sounds more righter to me. I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right on that. That's why I refer to him as Young in most of my notes, probably.
Probably, because you're like, that word, I'm not trying to say that.
Yeah, my brain just won't deal with it.
The other thing I was going to say before I criticized your pronunciation was, could you imagine if they had never left and then like what they were just like what they are now in Salt Lake City, but in Ohio or Missouri or like in Illinois? Like if that was, because Utah, my understanding from your history lesson is basically when they settled there kind of really wasn't anything worth noting. And so they sort of made it notable.
I think it was 148 people that originally landed in Salt Lake, and now it's like 700,000 or something like that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, imagine if this this is either Chicago's neighbor or becomes what Chicago is now. I don't know. That could be...
Just like how that would affect the different states if, the epicenter of Mormonism was further east. Be interesting.
Yeah. Now, in the late 1800s and early 1900s, the church did start distancing itself from polygamy and trying to be a little more integrated with U.S. society. I think it was like 1903, 1906, they finally came out and said...
You can only have 2 wives.
Yeah, we're not doing this stuff. One fellow that grew up as a Mormon there in Salt Lake was a guy named Mark Hofmann. He was born in the 40s. He collected coins as a kid and a teenager. And at some point he found out about this little error that made a penny really rare. Some little...
It's a mint mark.
Yeah, well, okay. You know about these coin things. I don't know so much, but like a screwed up coin is
all right, so
more valuable than any other.
Right. Well, so, if you've ever looked at your change, sometimes you might notice there's like a little P or a D or an S or whatever, your coins, and that just tells you what mint it was minted at. So Philadelphia, Denver, San Francisco. And so some of these coins, if there are less of them that are minted, then they're worth more money. And some significantly so. So there's, I didn't ever find the details on this. It sounds like you did, but I can kind of piece it together. There was a year where, one of the mints put out just a scarcely low number of these coins. And so if you find one that's from, say, the Philadelphia mint, it's not rare at all. It's basically worth like 25 cents in good condition or whatever, not a lot of money. But if you find one with one of the other mint marks, then the value goes up a ton. And so what you have is people, which I think you're getting ready to tell us this is what he did. You have people throughout history who have essentially tried to fake the rare mint mark one by adding that mint mark. And, they just use various, it's almost like, you're melting down whatever copper type stuff and you're trying to create the mint mark and make it look like it came from the mint. The problem with that is it's incredibly difficult to make it look authentic because, as you can imagine, if you're melting metal onto a coin, it doesn't look like it was pressed with 60,000 tons of pressure from the mint. It's not going to look crisp. It's going to look different. There's going to be issues. People are going to be able to tell somebody just added a mint mark. And if you've ever watched an episode of Pawn Stars, you probably know what I'm talking about.
I think I would probably be very obvious with this because the fact that I have tried to put a fake P on this coin and it looks more like a B and I'm holding it out trying to sell it with 3 fingertips burnt off might give it away. I don't know. But, there's also the issue of errors that get in circulation too. Like if something is accidentally double stamped or, I don't know, there's other weird little errors in coins and currency that are occasionally found. Of course, the mint stops it as soon as it's discovered, but a few of those get out into circulation and now the error ones, the ones with the boo-boo, are worth a lot of money.
Yeah, honestly. So Granddad had a coin that he thought was a very rare error that he had never seen before. And he sent it off to this dude who was like an expert on, so it was a silver dollar. And he sent it to this guy who was an expert in silver dollars who sent it back with a letter that said, yeah, it's this, this mint mark over this mint mark, which sometimes that happens where you get 2 different mint marks. And so you can kind of see both of them. And so you can barely see it. Over time, though, having it reevaluated, it was actually a different mint mark error than what that expert had said. So the letter to Granddad, which it's addressed to him and everything, but it's actually, that's inaccurate. But that guy at that time was considered one of the top experts in the country and still is considered one of the top experts in coins. So they can't even agree sometimes.
Yeah, authentication is tricky. What he figured out then, he's young, like around 14, he figures out that these certain things make things very valuable, and he wanted to see if he could do it. And he did it. And he did it well. So he was able to take just a garden variety penny and make this mint mark or error or whatever it was that made it valuable and passed it off. And his fellow collectors bought it. They believed it. They thought it was authentic. And so he did more of that because, when something works, how you do it. And he just loved fooling people. He loved the fact that he created something that people thought was real. They bought it.
And my understanding was this guy, he's kind of been quoted as saying once he sent it off to be authenticated and got it back, and from the group or whoever it was that looked at it and they authenticated it in writing, he was of the opinion that once they authenticated it, it was in fact authentic. He's been attributed with saying that. In his mind, once that group of experts said, this is genuine, then it was genuine because they said so. And I think that's telling about his mindset, and then sort of like you're saying, I can hear you building up to it, right? This is kind of what propels him into, I'm sure, what you're going to talk about.
He just wants to keep going, but I think the thing there is to notice that his motive from a very early age, it was not to make money. It was he wanted to get one over. He wanted to be able to be so good at his craft that no one, even the experts, couldn't distinguish it from what it was supposed to be.
Yeah, like he really enjoyed that. You're right. I agree.
Now, by 14, he knew himself that he was an atheist, but he kept his appearance up as a good Mormon. He was raised in a Mormon family. He lived in Salt Lake City where, like they say, you don't have to be a Mormon to live there, but it definitely helps. And this guy doesn't, to see this guy in any of the interviews or videos from, over a span of 20, 30 years, he looks and sounds like a huge nerd.
Yeah, right.
He is very soft-spoken, very quiet, got glasses that are huge, like Sally Jesse Raphael glasses, if anybody remembers those.
That's a good description. Our younger listeners, have no idea what you're talking about, and anybody our age and older is going to know exactly what you're talking about.
He looks like someone that, he did spend a year in medical school before he dropped out because forging shit was a lot more fun and lucrative for him, but he looks like someone that could totally be one of those quiet, mild-mannered doctors, or a book nerd, which is where he ended up. Even though he knows he's not buying the Mormon thing, he's still part of the Mormon life. He goes to England as part of his missionary service, and there he takes an interest in bookshops and documents and forging documents, and he ends up selling documents allegedly written by everyone from George Washington to important figures in Mormon history. All kinds of, many of his documents were authenticated by the Library of Congress and all the top experts in writing of the day or the types of writing he was selling. He was producing documents from the 1600s through the 1800s.
Wow.
That he was supposedly finding, and he was finding all kinds of great and rare things. And it was interesting because a lot of things that he would find, they had some, like there was already sort of a question about certain aspects of things that the document that would show up that he found sort of fit right in with what some people had already wondered, whatever the case it was.
It's one of these cases of he's giving people what they're hoping and looking for that didn't exist, but now all of a sudden, voila, he's willed it into existence.
There it is.
Yeah.
He said that part of he attributed his success, especially with the Mormon documents, because that's where he ended up leaning, was historical Mormon documents.
I kind of like Mormon better.
I'm reminded, I was in elementary school, and I'll never forget this. We're going around doing that stupid thing where you each read a paragraph or two out of the textbook. Mm-hmm. Which is horrible because some kids can read and some kids can't. We get to this farm boy. He was a little late that day because he had trouble getting his truck started and dropping his kid off at daycare before he got there to the 6th grade. Big old kid. Anyway, he's reading very monotone voice and calls the Mormons the morons. And I will never forget that. We're just talking about how in 1838 the morons, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, the whole class lost it. He didn't even get the joke. I don't think he knew what he had said, but that always sticks with me. So, all right, it's morons, it's Mormons, not Mormon. I'm sorry, Mormons. That was a slip. Nothing against your faith. I don't know. All I know is what I'm telling you that I've researched here. Anyway, so he really gets into things in the Mormon history. Oh, sure. Okay.
That was tough for you.
Yeah, it really was. My tongue got tied on how I mispronounced it and how that kid did it, and now getting back to where I'm at.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about this dude, and at this point, I imagine, even though he's not 14 anymore, he's still pretty young when he's doing a lot of this forging, and all I can think about is, I don't know if you had to do this, but in school, we had to create an old document, and we used, like, coffee and whatever, and you'd wrinkle it up and stain it, and, to make your document look old. Did you ever do a project like that?
Probably, but I don't remember it.
You've repressed it.
I mean, I know I've done like tea staining at home to make things look a certain way, but having a look to the naked eye and then being able to withstand the scrutiny of...
Well, that's what I mean, right? So like that process where it's just, okay, kind of looks old and, I mean, that's easy relatively, but I remember being annoyed because I felt like that was a lot of work. And this guy, I'm sure there's a lot that goes into this, whether it's the type of paper you use and the type of ink you use and the technique. And, I'm sure there would have been a lot of work that went into, I mean, if you're talking about George Washington and all these other documents and authenticated by the Library of Congress and other experts, they're looking at a lot of things. It's not like they just look at a document and go, oh yeah, it looks old. I mean, they're checking for all of these various things to be right. So I mean,
they did, and they were, and initially he passed all the tests. He found some of these documents were written using iron galvatanic ink, which is not used anymore, but back in, the time period back then, I don't know which document exactly it was, 1600s, 1700s. It might have been the Oath of a Freeman that he did, or it could have been the Salamander letter. But iron galvatanic ink was used, and he found a recipe. I mean, the guy lives in old bookstores, so
Right. How hard is that?
he ends up finding a recipe, and he makes up his own iron galvatanic ink, which will certainly pass some tests when they go to look at it. They can tell, oh, this isn't from a Bic.
Yeah.
But then the paper, which is very interesting to me, what he did with the paper, how books oftentimes will have blank pages at the end?
Mm-hmm.
Because I guess they have to be printed in an even number of pages because they're then folded over and cut. He would, in these old bookstores, he would just rip out that blank page out of a book that was 300 years old, and
300-year-old paper.
now he has authentic 300-year-old paper.
That's pretty smart.
And then he took it one step further, because his recipe for iron galvatanic ink, he thought, well, what if they try and carbon date this?
Mm-hmm.
So he would take a sliver of the old paper from the book, burn it, and then put the ashes, mix that in with the iron galvatanic ink so that they carbon dated it. There you go. This ink is really this old.
That's fascinating.
Just deep, right?
Yeah, I know one of the things that I saw when you mentioned you were going to do this case, and I just kind of looked at it briefly, with that iron, whatever, the ink. My understanding, he kind of created some sort of a device or something where he would put the ink was on there, and he would use magnets to draw the ink deeper into the paper to make it
so it wasn't
seem
laying on top.
aged. Yeah, which I thought, this is not like your 10-minute, I just wrote a fake document. This is a lot.
No, he also figured out part of his process in the washing and settling involved ammonia, and he would also use just a household iron over top the writing to sort of bake it in and dry out the ink and do it. He put a lot of effort into it. You got to give him that.
All right. Now, here's the deal, Bob. We're like 20 minutes into this thing, and nobody's died yet. So I get that he's this master forger who's fooled everybody and doesn't care at all about Mormonism, but is just basically taking these people to the cleaners for all they're worth because, he can. And he likes it. So somebody gonna, not to be crude, but are we gonna get to the death part anytime soon?
Well, hold your morbid curiosity for just a minute.
I'm just thinking about our listeners.
Well, we're almost there, and
Okay.
I'm one that is always pushing you to get to the point.
Yeah, that's why I'm finding some irony in this, where here you are with your 20-minute history lesson.
I'm not trying to go off the grid here, but this stuff all makes sense. So in 1980, Hofmann sells the church something called the Anthon Grand Script.
Okay.
Or transcript, because I don't know what a grand script is, but it's an Anthon transcript.
Maybe it is a grand script.
Now this thing, it's this document that has these Egyptian-looking symbols that were supposedly what Joseph Smith copied from the gold plates that he then translated into the Book of Mormon. And this document was allegedly found inside like a 17th century King James Bible, and it's all like gummed up and stuck to the pages. Can't get it out. But Hofmann has a friend who's like into rare books and ancient stuff, gets her to come over and look at it, and actually has her pretty much take the lead on unstucking this thing, opening it up without destroying it to see what it reveals. So that was genius on his part, because obviously he created this thing.
Right.
It was not real, but now he's got her hook, line, and sinker to be able to say, yes, I saw it I took it out. And this particular Bible was owned by someone that was very significant in Mormon history. So
it lends to the credence that it's a real thing.
Yes. So he's got that. He is, does that deal with the Mormon Church, and that sort of sets him up. He's on the map. They're interested in what he's doing. Then he has another letter in 1981, and this letter is one supposedly written by Joseph Smith. That it's called the Joseph Smith Blessing. And this letter supposedly declares that Joseph Smith III is the true successor to the OG. Not Brigham Young.
Which that would be a big deal.
That is a big deal. He offers it to the church, and they're like, it's too expensive. They would later regret that, because he then offered it to the the RLDS, which is the branch of
The real. Is that what the R stands for?
I think, what is it? Revised?
Okay.
Something like that. But this is the branch that ended up following Joseph Smith III, not Young. So his church doesn't want it. So he's like, oh, the church that's been saying that their guy is the real leader, I'll take an offer to them.
Where did they settle? They didn't go to Salt Lake too, did they?
I think they wound up in Missouri.
I thought the governor kicked them all out.
Yeah, but these...
You got me in the daggone rabbit hole of this stuff, man.
You don't want to know the history, so we're moving on.
I know.
Anyway, he offers it to this other church, and basically what happens is now it's a hot commodity. Everybody wants it now.
It's got a good bidding war going on, huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
But, he's a good LDS follower. He donates it to his church in exchange for items from their collection with a total value of a little over $20,000.
Okay.
But then he leaks the existence of it and that it exists and the contents of it to the media, which undermines the church's intent to acquire it and bury it. They don't want it out. So the New York Times writes this big old article about it, and then the LDS is forced to acknowledge it exists and publicly present it to the RLDS because it sort of proves their version.
The exact opposite of what they wanted to do.
At this point, he knew he had the scheme.
He's just putting his thumb in their finger, or his thumb in their eye at this point.
Yeah, and he's like, "This is so powerful. I can control these leaders, these church leaders. I got them." So his plan was ultimately, like his big heist was, he wanted to sell to the church the 116 lost pages from the Book of Mormon, which of course he would completely forge. They don't know what it says. But he's going to create it, and he's going to fill it with inconsistencies and contradictions.
Sure.
And of course, he's going to sell it to them and also make sure he leaks it so that he gets their money, but can also get this nonsense out there.
Caffeine is good for you. That's what the lost pages say.
Right. Now, in 1983, he sells the church a letter that reports that Joseph Smith was treasure hunting and practicing magic 5 years after what's considered the first vision, his meeting of Moroni. He assured the church that there are no other copies of this letter, and he figured they would want to buy this thing and hide it away because, this guy that has the vision, the angel, the gold plates, you find out 5 years after this great awakening of his, he's still out there doing magic and
playing in the woods.
Treasure hunting doesn't really support their known history. Mm-hmm. So anyway, he tells them there's no other copies, but then they buy it from him, and they
didn't learn their lesson the last time.
Well, no, I guess not.
Okay.
So they end up buying it from him, and then of course Hofmann leaks to the press.
I mean, I know how this story's going to end, and I don't even know how this story's going to end.
Forcing the church to produce the document for further study, and this was a document that they had been denying existed.
Sure. So
they had to go from no, there's no such document to oh, crap. Yeah, here it is. Go see what you want to do.
Wow.
So then, see, I'm going ahead a whole year right here.
Okay.
In 84, Hofmann and a surrogate are offering to sell something called the Salamander Letter, which alleges that Joseph Smith was practicing magic and money digging when he met a white salamander, not the angel Moroni, who was the source of the Book of Mormon.
I want to be clear. When you say salamander, you mean like the little lizard thing?
That's the way I understand it, a white salamander. Now, after this all came out, some scholar, historian, Mormon guy says, well, salamanders are known as mythical creatures that can live in fire, and you could consider that an angel because they can live in fire, and, maybe loosely translated, it means the same thing.
Yeah, salamander, angel, same thing.
Right, yeah. Anyway, this letter would be pretty devastating to the known history of the Mormon Church.
Definitely a contradiction to all of the official accounts.
It sounds a lot, to a lot of people, the fact that an angel appeared and said there's these gold plates near your house, dig them up and transcribe them, that's kind of hard to believe. But if you have that history for over 100 years and now someone says, no, what actually happened
The little lizard told him what to do.
Right. He's out doing magic tricks, hunting for buried treasure, and a lizard shows up and tells him this. Yeah, you're going to think more likely, there's reason to question this man's, So,
gosh.
So he takes this letter, he offers it through a surrogate to the LDS Church. They pass. Now, some people say the reason that they passed on this is because they didn't want it to be perceived that they were going to buy it and bury it. But if they could get, a good follower to buy it and donate it to them, that would be okay. He also offered this letter to other collectors, including the Tanners, who were prominent critics of the Mormon faith. And they passed on purchasing the letter because they thought it was a fake. So even though it would have been good for them, they're like, hey, we're just not buying this.
Yeah.
Anyway, Steve Christensen ultimately bought the letter, planning to have it authenticated and then donate it to the church. He paid $40,000 for it.
Wow.
And according to some, this was the church's solution to get the letter, but not appear to be snatching it up.
Now, hang on a second. Just for clarification, what we've went through like a couple hundred years of history, I feel like. So where are we now when Christensen buys this? Are we in like the...
January of 1984.
Oh, okay. All right. Helpful. So 40 G's in 84 is probably like, what, a couple 100,000 today?
Yeah.
I mean, seriously.
I think roughly at about 5x, yeah, it'd be about 200,000.
Yeah. Inflation, baby.
So then, and we're down into we're down to the deal that broke the camel's back. We're getting right up to what, but you really have to have this background to make it all fit together.
This is where he annihilates his family.
No.
Okay.
But there's this, supposedly this McClellan collection out there that contains a whole lot of documents that were written by someone that, 100 years before had been a Joseph Smith follower, was an LDS member, but left and then had some contradictory opinions and information and wrote a lot of that stuff down, allegedly. Mark Hofmann says he can get it, he's found it, he needs the money to do it. So he borrows the money he needs. He's saying it's going to cost $150,000, but he borrows that $150,000 from like 3 different places.
Oh.
He even has a loan, I think it was a $500,000 or $1 million loan from one of the banks that was just a signature loan on the recommendation of the Mormon Church. So he owed a lot of people a lot of money.
What's old boy doing with all this cash?
I can't figure that out because he was taking in a lot of money with all these loans and these investments that he was getting. I've seen pictures and interviews from his home back during this time. It's a modest house. The only thing he had, he and his wife, and I think they had a couple of kids. They had a Volkswagen Vanagon, a brown one. And he did have a little Toyota MR2, like an electric blue. But I mean, that wasn't, we're not talking about a Ferrari.
Yeah, right.
The only thing, apparently, he did have like an affliction for buying like rare first edition books. And I guess that can get expensive. But he was promising investors, he sort of had a Ponzi scheme going too, because when he would take money to go invest, like in this McClellan collection, take the money and tell him, we're going to double your money. And then he would have another investor that he's promised the same thing to. Well, now he's got to start paying back investor 1, so he uses investor 2's money and pays him back with the interest. So he gets in a little jam there.
Yeah.
But other than that, there aren't details about him just blowing his money on like hookers and cocaine or anything
that we know of.
I mean, it seems like he had it's a pretty boring life, except for it was all made up. Anyway, the issue is he didn't have the McClellan collection.
Color me shocked.
But he's scheduled to meet with Steve Christensen on October 15th, 1985, where Steve, who is the one who personally bought the Salamander letter, is going to be donating it to the church. Steve is, on behalf of the Mormon Church, going to meet Hofmann, look over the McClellan collection, and close the deal.
Oh, okay.
And deal with the authentication of it, and close the deal and make it happen. Problem is, like I said, Hofmann didn't have it. He didn't have a clue where it was, and he didn't have time to forge all these supposedly hundreds of documents. Because he'd have to make up what, he had gotten himself so far along, like, we're down to today is the day. I don't have it. I don't have time to forge it. A couple hundred documents. So
he's just talking out his butt.
He's kind of in trouble. Like, It's tomorrow. I'm supposed to meet this guy. What am I going to do? So
he does what any reasonable person does, and he just disappears.
He decides that he needs to buy time, and he decides that his targets will be Steve Christensen. That'll take him out of play for tomorrow's meeting. He says, I've got to get rid of Steve Christensen. He's got to go because I can't meet with him.
Well, target. I would just leave town. What do you...
Well, he decided instead that he was going to take out Steve Christensen, and to sort of throw the suspicion off of him, he was also going to take out Gary Sheets, who was the owner of a financial company that was itself in some financial trouble and had some unhappy clients. And Steve had worked for Gary Sheets prior to sort of going off on his own. So he's going to make it look like the killings had something to do with that financial company because these two people are linked together.
I see.
So he gets up early on the wee hours of October 15th, 1985, and he takes a bomb and goes and puts it at the home of Gary and Kathy Sheets. And then he rides on into town, into Salt Lake City. Steve Christensen has an office in the Judge Building, which is downtown in Salt Lake City. So he goes in that building, goes up the elevator, and sets a box addressed to Steve with a pipe bomb in it right in front of Steve's office door. So when Steve gets to his office, boom, explosion, Steve is dead. Later that day, Kathy Sheets, who's Gary's wife, she must have found the package because she got killed by the bomb left at the Sheets home. You know, again, this was his way of getting out of having to do something with the McClellan collection. Hoffmann writes in his letters to the parole board that his plan initially was to kill himself or take out other people and himself, but this is ultimately the plan he went with, and he finally decided on who the victims were going to be the night before the bombs.
That sounds like trash, garbage to me, but okay.
Yeah, I don't know. So that night, the two bombs have gone off, and these are pipe bombs built with, they're motion-activated pipe bombs. So they're built with a mercury switch. And a mercury switch is, so it's sort of like this glass tube that you have two wires that run into one end of it. Kind of like you might imagine maybe like a bulb on a Christmas light, only the two wires that are going in, it's not one continuous wire, it's two separate wires that are separated. Mercury is a metal, so it's conductive, but it's also a liquid. So you start with this thing, say the mercury is at the, one side of this tube, angled down a bit, and then on the left side is where the in wire and out wire are going in this glass tube. So that if you tilt the package to the left, then the liquid mercury metal rolls down into the tube, covers both of those wires, makes the connection, and the bomb goes off. Now, you can't send something like this through the mail. You got to,
for obvious reasons.
They're almost always hand delivered by the person who made the bomb. So that right away tells investigators something about it. Yeah. And bombs blow up into a cajillion little pieces, and the ATF, their job is collecting every single one of those pieces and figuring out everything about how this bomb was made so that they can, there aren't a whole lot of bomb makers in the world, and a lot of times there's a signature so they can look at the type of wire. If there's multiple types, that helps you narrow down. I won't get into all that. But anyway, you got to be a little bit crazy to use a mercury switch and carry one.
Because of mercury poisoning?
Right. No, because that liquid rolls the other way in that tube, and it's kaplooey, and bad things happen.
Well, yeah, I imagine you got to drive it to these places. So, imagine that car ride, right? Like, you're, just taking every turn at 5 miles an hour.
Right? Right. Now, I've never seen one. I've never built one. So, I don't know. Anyway, so Hoffmann's watching the news that evening after these two bombs have gone down, and he sees a report about the bombings, and he also sees that there was a witness in the Judge Building who saw the person delivering a box that morning and sitting it outside of Steve's door. He saw there was a witness that was in the elevator with him that saw this man carrying a box addressed to Steve Christensen. So they're pretty sure, like, this is our guy. And they also say on the news that they've got that witness helping them develop a sketch. We'll be showing you shortly.
Oh.
And they also mention a detail that the witness described the package delivery fella as wearing a rather unique jacket. It was like a letterman's jacket without a letter on it in certain colors. So Hoffman's like, oh shit.
That's me.
They're going to know that's my jacket. They got a drawing of me. They got a witness. I'm in trouble now. Meanwhile, the church wasted no time in appointing a substitute to close the deal on the McClellan collection.
Okay.
And says, hey, Mark, we're going to send so-and-so now that Steve's kind of not unavailable.
Yeah.
We'll send so-and-so. Let's have him meet you tomorrow.
I wondered that about his plan, because it's not like Steve Christensen is just on behalf of himself because he wants them going to buy these documents. Like, did he really? I mean, I guess he's just in that mode of, like, clearly not thinking rationally, because his explanation for how to fix this is to use pipe bombs and mercury switches to blow people up. But,
right.
But, like, I mean, really, like, what's that going to buy you? 2 days? Like, I don't...
I guess his thinking was that given that, I mean, because of the Steve Christensen dude, it sounds like, I don't know the structure of the Mormon church, but it sounds like he was a pretty, I don't know if it's a deacon or what they call it there, an elder, someone, I don't know what you call it.
He was somebody.
Yeah, maybe they thought that out of, respect and dignity for Steve's passing, they would at least buy him a week or two, but not so much. Or maybe they would say, or maybe he thought he could drive the theory that, oh no, there's a killer out here on the loose about these documents. Of course, he was trying to get him to think it was the financial thing, but maybe he'd get the church to just back off for a while over safety concerns. I don't know.
Yeah.
So he says, well, this is great. They're giving me until tomorrow. I got to do something. And people are going to know who I is. So what do I do now? So he does what anybody would do. He takes his wife and kids and stays at his parents' house that night. I think it was like an hour away, something. And under the auspice of, this guy that was connected to this document, the collection I'm trying to sell has been murdered. And, I could be in danger as well. Let's not be at home.
Yeah, okay. That story makes some sense, but I bet what you're about to tell us is not going to make a lot of sense.
Takes the wife and kids. They go up to mom and dad, spends the night. The next morning, he gets up. He goes and builds another bomb.
As one does.
That morning, and I think it was right around lunchtime, we have another bombing. Only this one was different because the person didn't die, and the person that was bombed was Mark Hofmann himself.
Uh-oh.
He was blown up at his car, his little Toyota MR2, standing at the driver's side door.
Was the car okay?
No. I mean, the very front, the front clip and the tail lights were good. Other than that,
that's unfortunate.
This thing did not fare well. Now, he tried to say that what had happened was, of course, he was a victim and that he had opened the door and this box fell on the floor from the seat to the floor and exploded. And Jerry Taylor, the ATF agent, who is hysterical if you ever get to listen to anything he has to say, he's really great. But he explains that they knew from the evidence that was impossible because the pipe bomb is going to blow out in two primary directions, the two ends of the pipe. They know from the hole in the passenger door, they've got where it went this way. Mm-hmm. It also the other end went into Mark Hofmann's knee.
So it's outside the car.
Right. So, you were not where you say you were. There's no way this thing was on the floor. And they were able to prove that where Mark Hofmann was kneeling on the driver's seat of his car, reaching over the center console.
Like delicately placing his little bomb package on the passenger seat, maybe.
Or getting it out go deliver it to...
Where do you know where he was, like... physically, like the car?
He was downtown and...
Oh, so he really was like getting ready to go put it somewhere.
Now, he says that his plan that day, in one of his letters, he said that his plan that day with that bomb was to kill himself. Because
he did a really crappy job.
Yeah, my problem, I can't buy that he was trying to kill himself because why is he downtown carrying this bomb outside of, getting it out of his car?
And I'm just gonna,
Like, if you want to kill yourself, number one, just sit in your car with the bomb, or there's a lot easier
I was gonna
ways.
say, how many people realistically have suicided by pipe bomb? I mean, maybe it's happened. I'm not saying it's never happened, but that has to be like super rare.
I do know of one case.
Maybe we should cover that one because that is. I mean, when you
But
first
it wasn't
said that,
as though the person in that case, it wasn't as though they contemplated, I'm going to kill myself and I'll make a pipe bomb and do it. It was someone that
they get caught or something.
yes,
Yeah. Okay.
they
that
had most of the things that they needed already and just whipped it up while the police were there.
Yeah. Okay. Like that, I follow. But like, things are looking down, and I'm gonna, off myself. I think I'll use a pipe bomb. Like I don't. That just.
It doesn't make any sense.
That's beyond irrational. That's like, what are you doing?
He did say also in his writings, for whatever you can believe of them, that it wasn't about the money. I mean, the debt bothered him, but the issue was he did not want to be found out to be a fake. He had to have everyone believe that he had been the hero that had found all these documents through his meticulous genealogy research and he actually hired, and this could be where some of his money went, he hired genealogists to trace prominent Mormon families back from Joseph Smith and find out where all the descendants were. And so then he would go allegedly contact these people, see if they had any, hey, did Grandpa leave you a Bible or anything? And, miraculously find all these great documents.
Yeah, it seems to me like this, and I've heard in another podcast I've been listening to, they talk about this duping delight where people, it seems like this guy, like really enjoy, are thriving off of getting one over on somebody else. And so here, it's like, to me, it sounds like from the time he was 14 and he faked the penny until now, like that's what's driving him. It's not, he's driving a Toyota MR2 and a Vanagon. It's not money. It's not fame. It's being able to pull one over and really make people believe his version of reality.
That was it. That was the thing for him. That was his main priority. When it came to the investigation, there was more than enough. I mean, more than enough to prove it was him. There had been the morning, in the dark, early hours of the morning when he dropped the bomb off at the Sheets home, there had been a teenager, like a 13-year-old boy, a neighbor, that saw a brown Volkswagen Vanagon drive into the Sheets house and drive back out down their little road. See, back then, you could tell cars apart even in the dark.
Well, a Vanagon's pretty distinct.
Yeah, exactly. And that is pretty distinct. So,
I mean, this guy, like, for being as smart as he is, he's kind of an idiot.
He's doing some dumb stuff.
Yeah.
They also, the jacket, they found that in his house. The eyewitness that saw him there at the Judge building was able to say, yeah, that's the dude. Yeah, that's the jacket. They also found the location where he built all the bombs, and all the materials matched up. They did the same wires, the same tool marks, the same nails, because he used nails wrapped outside the Steve Christensen bomb. Everything matched. It was like, yeah, it's him. It is 100% him. Mm-hmm. So he ends up avoiding the death penalty. He is facing all kinds of state and federal charges. So he ends up pleading. I think the state had him on, 27, 30 counts, something like that. He ends up in a plea deal that gets him 5 years to life. That's quite a range.
That is a range.
But I guess the way that works in Utah, at least at the time, was it's a life sentence, but you are eligible for parole.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it was maybe 7 years in when the parole board first, or it might have been sooner than that. No, it was sooner than that. I think it was only a couple years in.
They give him some crayons and some toilet paper. He could probably forge his own parole certificate, and they just let him out.
They did eventually find letters in his prison cell that were written in 3 different inks and 3 different writing styles. I don't remember the contents of those letters. I do know that there were letters written before he met with the parole board about assassinating them. And there were also his comments to an inmate about killing the parole board. So that, combined with the fact that in all his writings to the parole board, he explained that he really just didn't think much about the fact of killing Kathy and Steve. They could just as well have had a heart attack that day, or gotten in a car accident, so what's the difference?
What's the big deal?
Plus, since he doesn't believe in God, like now they are, and then they wouldn't, so they just wouldn't exist anymore.
Okay.
So what's the issue? What's the problem? Well, that kind of creeped out the parole board, and they decided parole wasn't going to happen.
Oh, color me shocked.
Shortly after he was in prison, this was in '88, he decided he was going to kill himself, and he's gathered up a bunch of antidepressants from other inmates. He takes an overdose. It doesn't work. He doesn't die. But he's in a position where his body is on top of his right arm, unconscious for such an extended period of time. He has major tissue damage to his right arm, his forging arm, to the point where it doesn't work much at all anymore.
Now, there's some irony I can get on board with.
Right?
What happened? Is it just like the floppy arm? They cut it off or what? Do you know?
I mean, I don't know the guy. Hasn't been amputated, but it is significantly impaired. So I think his fancy forging days are over.
I mean, that's probably the best sentence. Like, honestly, if you could just give this dude a sentence, like chopping off a couple hands, yeah, try to forge something now. But he'd probably figure it out the way he is. He'd probably end up using his mouth to write with or something. But
I thought it was kind of interesting. It's sort of like between the irony of it and the biblical God saying, "Let vengeance be mine," and the almost like there are some things in the Bible where somebody steals, their hand gets cut off. This just lines right up with that,
The irony here in what happens to him at that point is that's pretty great.
It's not enough to avenge or to bring back Steve Christensen or Kathy Sheets. I mean, Kathy had nothing to do with nothing.
Right.
Like,
well, none of them. I mean, really, like nobody did anything to deserve being bombed by this guy. But you're right; she's completely like it's unintended, not for her, whatever. She's just minding her P's and Q's, and yeah, it's terrible.
And that's a thing that the criminologists have said for years is that bombers do not care who they kill because you can't target. It's not like they're pointing a gun at someone and firing. They have really no idea. They might have a primary target, but they know darn well anybody that picks this thing up is a goner. It could have been somebody's kid, and he even addressed that in his writings to the parole board of, I don't really care if it was the person, their spouse, their kids, whatever. Like, what, dude? What? You certainly are. Like, how did you fake being a faithful Mormon all the time? And you're just like, you can't understand why people are a little bothered by this whole death thing that you're doing. So, one of the ways that I thought was really interesting, did we talk about the alligatoring of the ink?
No, I was curious if you were going to talk about that. So
one of the ways that George Throckmorton, who was one of the latter persons to look at this, him and another fellow from a university, I can't remember his name, but they discovered some things because they not only tested what Hofmann expected them to test, but they went a little further. They put the writing under a microscope and it was cracked and alligatored. They're like, that's different from documents we've seen from this time. And it also had a blue haze that they didn't recognize from period documents. And what they found out was the ammonia that had been in whatever aging thing that Hofmann was using is what caused the blue haze. They tested it and said, look, if we use this, we get a blue haze. They also found that his process of running the household iron over the ink is what caused those cracks.
I see.
So they mixed up the iron galvatanic ink because of course the idiot left his recipe.
Why wouldn't
for
you?
them to find. So they mixed up a batch. They wrote like he did. They sort of followed his process. They used the iron like he did, the clothes iron. And sure enough, we got alligator cracks.
It's the same problem. Wow.
Yeah. Now, unfortunately, I do not know much about Steve Christensen, his personal life, other than he was married with children, and Kathy Sheets, other than she had a husband and children. And like you said, neither of them did a damn thing to deserve this.
That's crazy. I think, too, in addition to writing about killing the parole board, that expert that you just mentioned, wasn't that somebody else that he also targeted while he was in prison that he had talked about and was interested in seeing if he could have that person offed as well?
Probably. I doubt he liked him because Throckmorton ended up reviewing many, many, many things that were sold by Hofmann. But the church, I think, eventually estimated that they owned 450, 500 forged Hofmann documents in their collection.
That's crazy.
So imagine like the long-term consequences here. And they all say there are probably Hofmann forgeries out there that we don't even know about. Right. And it's not that he was just copying things. He was making shit up.
Just making it with a salamander. I mean, that's just like out of left field. Like he just, and if you think about it, it's perfect though, right? Because really he's an atheist. He probably thinks the Mormons are all stupid. And it's like the ultimate ha 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 ha. And look at you idiots, right? And
when he figures out that he can basically double tap them by getting them to buy the document and then leaking the details,
right,
and making them look stupid, he's all about it.
Yeah, all of it. The document in and of itself, and then the process. I mean, that's the kind of thing he's just eating that up. But I think this guy who is the one who was able to sort of scientifically prove these are forgeries, I feel like he would probably have more hate and disgust for that person than anybody else, because he's the one who's sort of unfoiled. Yeah. It's one thing to go, okay, this guy's in prison now and we suspect these are forgeries and blah blah blah. It's another thing to say they are forgeries, and this, I've figured out this is exactly how he did it.
Yeah, you would kind of think that Hofmann would respect that.
I don't know, because I think to me it's not a matter of like the craft for the craft's sake. I think it's a matter of he really got off on duping people.
That's true.
So this guy has now undone his duping, which is his whole life's work.
Right. It was to convince people had to believe that he had been the finder.
Yeah.
And I mean, there were people that believed like that he was touched by God to find these documents.
Sure.
Because how else do you explain that he just keeps finding? And not all the documents that he found were negative toward the Mormon church. He found some, like the Anthon transcript. That's what set him up with the church to begin with, because he had found something that helps prove their
Well, and think
history.
about it. That's all part of his process, right? Like, he's laying the foundation to then come up with these other things. And at that point, they don't feel like, wait, this guy's been coming up with all this. They're like, no, he gave us this document that's like the greatest document we've ever had. This must just be true. We believe it.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Plus, this guy also, he's found things by George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, and somehow he happens to find every missing letter that ever existed.
Right. Yeah, he found that one from George Washington to Marilyn Monroe.
Hey, thanks for hanging out with us on the Brothers in Crime podcast. Feedback and suggestions are always welcome. For links and resources related to this episode, please see the show notes or visit us at brothersincrimepodcast.com. We hope you'll save, subscribe, or bookmark us on your favorite podcast site, and join us for the next episode.